My name is Cathy. I'm a consultant at a company called Planet Technologies that's based out of Washington, D.C. over in the U.S. I'm a graphic designer by degree. I actually went to art school. I have a painting degree and a degree in graphic design and fell into SharePoint, never looked back. I'm a SharePoint MVP, honored to be that, and work with Microsoft directly on some of these things that I'll talk about today. I wrote on a SharePoint 2010 book, and if you were not able to attend but are interested in about more of branding when you get your videos of the conference, I had 2 sessions yesterday that are one about tools and processes, so kind of how to plan it and do the beginning stuff, and then one on premises. CatPaint1 on Twitter and SharePointCat.com. So what we're going to talk about in this session is we're going to talk about what are the different options for branding in Office 365, and then how do we choose what works best for us. Then we're going to go through some of the things of how do we create those different options, working with custom master pages, using the design manager, creating composed looks, creating the packages, basically how do we deploy and apply branding, and then what some of the future is for Office 365 branding, in my opinion. So kind of moving forward, picking the right option. We have lots of options when it comes to how do we customize things in SharePoint, and that doesn't limit us either when we move to Office 365. We have several different things. We have composed looks, which are SharePoint 2013 and Office 365's version of a theme. You know, Microsoft likes to change the name of their tools every product release. So composed looks is themes that we were used to in 2007 and 2010. Then we have the custom master page, custom CSS, custom page layout options, so basically our custom everything. We also have an additional component with this called device channels. This was the early onset of how responsive web design could happen in branding for Office 365 and SharePoint 2013. I'll say I don't anticipate it staying in Office 365 for very long, so I'm actually not going to talk about it. I feel that if you want to make your site responsive, you would do that through CSS. We'll talk about that a little bit when we're talking about creating custom CSS. So what do we actually do? Working with Office 365 is a challenge, right? And many of you maybe are working with Office 365 already. You notice that things change frequently and often and unanticipated. I get a new link, I get a new feature, I get a new something. It's always changing. They have kind of a 2-week deployment cycle from what I've timed out on different things. So different product teams, there's about 20 that work on Office 365 release at different times. So just about every 2 weeks you're going to get something new, even though they say it's monthly. For me, I see it every 2 weeks. They also update CSS and JavaScript frequently. And this affects our branding. So we have to kind of keep some of these things in mind. So what do we actually do? These are kind of the options that Microsoft wants us to do and encourages us to do. The first one is the global tenant theme. This is something new that came out that not a lot of people even know about, and I'm going to go into a little bit more about how you do it and what it is and where it applies next. Composed looks, again, themes. This is the encouraged and lauded from the rooftops way to brand SharePoint Online and Office 365. There's limitations to it, as always, with any option. So we're going to talk about what those are when we get to the composed look section. And then the next part of it, we can do custom everything, but I put the little caveat next to it with a tax. So probably November of last year, you may have heard them say, don't customize, no custom master pages. Quickly after that, they learned that that was what everyone wanted. And so they backed off that messaging. And now the messaging is, of course you can do a custom master page, but... ... I like to say it's kind of like choosing to pay a tax. The only problem with choosing to pay a tax and creating custom master pages and custom everything for SharePoint Online is that you don't determine when that tax is going to be levied. Microsoft does when they release a new feature that adds a component that either breaks it or needs updating. So you can go and do custom master pages, but you're going to have to update them. And you're going to need to do that. There are some things you can do to kind of prevent that a little bit and kind of work around. And so we'll talk about some of those more into it. So those are kind of our 3 primary options for creating custom branding for Office 365. The global tenant admin theme is actually where I can go through and customize this app launcher bar across the top. And what you see there is actually a custom global theme. You have to be a tenant admin for your tenant to be able to even see this or create it. So that takes designers out of the equation sometimes. We're not typically, designers and developers aren't always the admins of it. You get to that when you go into your admin portal. There is actually a link at the top, the name of your tenant. You would click on that, and one of the options underneath there is custom theming. And you can add an image, you can change the colors, you can change some of the font stuff, and then it gets applied. This is kind of what it looks like once it gets applied up there at the top. And then you can see it goes across the different areas. So because the app launcher is everywhere, that global theme goes across everywhere. So if I'm using Outlook Online and Exchange Online, it's in those as well because I still have that same app launcher. So this is the video portal. This is, our sites page in our tenant themes. There's a couple of issues with it. It's a great idea. It's a great concept. There's a couple of issues with it. The app launcher changes periodically, right? So I don't have complete control over what that looks like. And then if I'm in, say, my SharePoint Online sites, and I apply a composed look, custom color scheme, custom theme, that actually overrides the global theme. Global theme, yeah, it overrides the global theme. That looks like this. So here's a site where I applied custom color file to a custom theme on it, and I don't have that app launcher across the top. That's not the same with the logo in the middle. So there's a few places that it's not consistent. Are they going to change that? I don't know. I've asked. I've not gotten an answer. It's a great idea. Like I said, it's a great concept. It works in a lot of places. If you're using, say, a custom master page, custom CSS, you're not applying that custom composed look, it still inherits and you can use that. The other problem that I've run into is if you go through, you have to basically reset everything to get this away and get that app launcher back if you've applied a composed look to the site. So there's a few challenges in using that, but it does give us the ability to brand some of those experiences that we aren't able to touch with our traditional CSS, meaning Delve, the video portal, some of those pieces that are new functionality. Those are some of those, what Microsoft is calling the experiences. They like to call them those railed experiences. Here's a set of sites, a page that you get these kind of options like videos, and one can go in and do that. So it gives us the ability to brand those where we otherwise would not have the same ability. So where do I decide? How do I decide what I want to do? If you are using publishing, the publishing infrastructure. So I have a custom intranet that I'm primarily using for news. Maybe I have a collaboration area below that, but I have that section that I want to have that custom look for. I want to add headers and footers and custom links and move things around and make it fixed width and make it responsive. That's where you would do your custom master page. I will tell you that going through and doing that, I've done many of these. I've been working with Office 365 since it was BPOS, in 2007 and 2010 version. With the custom master pages, they have not updated the publishing infrastructure as frequently as they're adding new features everywhere else. So I have sites that I put in place a custom master page for the publishing infrastructure that I haven't had to edit in 6 months. So the tax on using that for publishing is much smaller than it is trying to use it in the collaboration areas. So for collaboration areas or anything else that's outside of one of those publishing sites, I recommend right now you go with the composed look or the theme, right? It still gives me the ability to change the colors, to customize some of those items. It doesn't give me the ability to move things around, add in headers, add in footers. But it gives me the ability to do those. As they're rolling out new features, they're testing them against themes to make sure that they pick up the theme look and feel and gets applied. So the theme in those areas that are being updated frequently is a great way to do that. Now, for anything like an app or those delves and video portals and things like that that you may be using, that's where the global theme comes into place, right? That global tenant theme. Because how those work, they're not using the same master page framework. They're using their own kind of framework to apply that out. So we can't hit it with anything else. That's kind of our only option for some of those. So there's kind of staggered levels of what you can do and where you should do things and how you should do things. Doing it this way, I actually had a conversation with Jeremy and VESA, who were doing the session before this about how to do this using code, they actually approve of this. They're like, yes, that's what we want people to do. I'm like, yes, it's our only option. So that's kind of the idea behind it. Publishing custom everything, custom master page, custom page layouts, whatever you want in that publishing infrastructure. Please keep in mind, if you decide to go that route, that you will at some point have to update it for something. What I've seen be updates, they changed when I was first doing them, it was the Sweet Bar, and then they changed it to the app launcher. I had to change CSS for the theming, my styling to apply to the app launcher. They may add a new icon somewhere, and it may not have the right colors applied to it, and you're going to have to go change that. They may add a new link. They may add a new menu bar. Whatever they're going to add, eventually you're going to have to update it, and that's where that tax concept comes in. If you can get used to that and you're using it, you're okay. I will say they do update the master pages that are being used. So Seattle.master in Office 365 has been updated about 16 times in the last year to add in new things. So if you make a copy of today's Seattle.master and customize it, that's what you're going to continue using. They're not going to obviously go update yours. So something you may get a new feature that's not showing up there, and so then I have to go edit that custom master page to add that feature in. That's kind of those ideas of taxes, so you can control some of that pace of movement a little bit in publishing. Now, the composed looks, which is the new theme for SharePoint 2013, I love renaming everything every year. It actually is composed of a master page, a color palette, the ability to do alternate CSS, a font palette, and a background image. Now, as they're moving towards that lesser customization, they're encouraging you not to create a custom master page to go along with this, and to just do the color palette, the font, the CSS, and the background image. They did give us some predefined options. I like to laugh and say that I don't know where they hired the designers that create these predefined options, because a few of them kind of, when they get applied, it's gone for years, since 2007 when they gave us custom themes, and you'd look at it and you're like, I need to go get some tissues. I think my eyes are bleeding. Kind of like this one. Who thought that was good? Yeah, they gave us some options. So you could customize one of those by actually going into it and changing the colors, changing the image, gives you a starting point. One thing to notice is kind of the site layout here is our master page option, right? So that's Seattle and Oslo. You'll also notice with a couple of them there may be an option called Tokyo. They picked major cities to name their master pages this time. But it's all about, this one is actually using Oslo, and the big difference between the master pages is how the navigation works. So in this one, this is actually not the top navigation menu. This is actually the quick launch menu, and the top navigation menu is hidden. That's how Oslo works. Seattle has both of them. So if that doesn't do it, just changing the colors and adding a different background image, you can create your own custom look. I will tell you that this process is not easy. There are ways to kind of do this at a lesser level. You can do this, you name it, you have to give it the master page, and you have to do it through this, so you may miss some syntax kind of thing. You have to do the theme URL, you can give it an image so that it shows up in that page, what my font scheme is, how I want it to disappear on the page. So I kind of have to go through and do that. But there's a few other things you have to do with it. So I have to have the HTML file, and I have to have the .master file. That's for that master page, which, again, they're encouraging us not to do. The preview file, the SP color file, and the SP font. Additionally, you can do the background image. You don't have to. I will say that when they did these, they released a tool about 9 months after they came out with SharePoint 2013 that very few people know about. It's the SharePoint color palette tool. I can tell you, I know that they're really proud of this tool. I'm going to demo it for you later, and you'll see why. The icon is like the standard blank page. We're super proud of the tool. It's just a blank page. It doesn't size down, so if you need to make it smaller, it just cuts off. So they kind of released a tool to do it, and they've never updated it, so it still shows it with the Sweet Bar instead of the app launcher and things like that. But it is a great tool to create those color files. You can do that through opening up that file as a text in Notepad, and editing it manually, but this gave us a visual way to do that, and it's a great little thing. I'm going to show it to you. If you go out and look up SharePoint color palette tool, you'll find it, but this link will get you there also. So once I create that, the font file is smaller. It's just a SP font. I recommend opening one of the existing ones, saving a copy of it, and creating your own from it. Again, open it in Notepad, and you'll see the schema of that one. It's pretty simple. It's just 2 fonts, so it's not super hard to adjust that one. But once you get those created, where do I go put them? Well, we're creating a composed look, so obviously it goes in the theme gallery. So in the theme gallery, there's 2 folders. 15, you will see, if you've never applied a composed look before, you wouldn't see this themed folder, but you're going to put it in the 15 folder, and then you just simply upload them in there. There's no rhyme or reason for how they are. You can name them whatever you want. They don't have to follow their fancy font scheme 001 schema, and color palettes are the same way. Palette 001, you can name it whatever you want and upload it in there. Once you have done all of those steps, you might get your custom composed look added here. I will tell you myself, I do this all of the time for people. I do it with just the color file. I upload the color file, it adds it to that option list, those drop downs, and then I select that with the Seattle.master, and I don't have to go through all of the steps to put it in here. Makes it a lot easier than going through all of those additional steps, in my opinion. So you can do it with just color palette, just font scheme. They get added in there. Pretty easy. So the next option for doing the branding for Office 365 is create custom everything, right? Again, like I said, you can do this everywhere. I've done this on team sites. I highly encourage you, just with the pace of advancement and the features that are coming out in those collaboration areas, to kind of back down a little bit and go towards the composed look and do this in publishing. But in SharePoint 2013, they gave us this magical little tool called the Design Manager. And when they first came out with it, they told us that you could take any site that had been designed and developed in HTML, even by an advertising agency, and you could import it using Design Manager, and it would be SharePoint. And I put my little guy on his magic carpet here because I feel like that's what it is. And somebody's trying to take me on a magic carpet ride, and really they've got strings holding him up. They're just invisible cables. So yes, it does convert it to HTML so that I can use HTML to create my custom master page, but that is not, it doesn't convert those pieces, right? So I have navigation in my HTML file that I'm importing. It doesn't know how to translate that into top navigation and side navigation. I have to help it along. So you could go into the Design Manager, and this is what it looks like. You get to it from the gear in the top right corner. Design Manager, you can go down, you can import your files. Once you do that, you're going to see that they're going to go through, you're going to go find it. You basically create a folder. This is one of the tricky things about it, is you actually had to put this source original folder in the master page gallery first, and then go link to it from there. So you had to go find it, and then you would import it in. Now, I will tell you, this one, if you see the screen, index is the one we just imported, and it says warnings and errors. If you're used to getting those kind of, unspecified error messages from SharePoint, you'll be grateful to know that this warnings and errors, if you actually click on it, will tell you where in your HTML file the error is. It's actually one of the useful error messages in there, and you can fix it so that it can convert successfully. Once you do that, you're going to get something that maybe looks like this when you go and look at it, and you're going to think, oh, it's not too bad, until you actually start editing the file, and then you realize that none of this is contained inside the content placeholder. I just imported it in, and it's kind of above it. So I always tell people, scroll down. When you import it in and it comes to the scroll down, and you'll see all the SharePoint stuff at the bottom that you have to go import into. So you can edit those master pages through any program you want. I like to tell people it's all based on what you're comfortable with. You can use Dreamweaver, you can use Notepad, you can use Expression Blend, you can use Visual Studio, you can use SharePoint Designer. Whatever you're comfortable with is how you could do that. The encouraged way to edit these is to map the drive to your machine. So map that master page gallery folder to your actual computer so that you can save back and forth directly into it. If you are working with more than one site, you're going to have issues with that. It doesn't like to map more than one site's master page gallery. So you would want to maybe look at the alternate of opening that master page gallery in Windows Explorer view. If you're working on a Mac, there's some extra steps to try to map it. Myself, I work in maybe 20 sites at a time. I've never been able to map all 20. I can map maybe one, and then I have to kind of clear some cookies and things like that to be able to map the next one. But basically, you're saving those files out. You'll notice that there is a .html file and a .master file. Those are actually created. SharePoint is .NET, right? It's .NET based. So the master page file is still what SharePoint uses. But it's given us now the ability to edit with HTML, which makes it so that newer people coming in from the web development world can actually edit. Designers that you maybe have, web developers who've never worked with a .master file can edit using HTML. But the trick here is that if you ever want to only use HTML, please don't ever open and do anything with that .master file extension of the same name. Because if you accidentally make a change in it and you hit save, it severs the connection between the two. And then you can only work with the .master file moving forward. You can revert it back, but it takes me about 3 hours to go through that process. So I just tell people, if you want to use HTML, don't just pretend the .master one doesn't exist. The connection between those two is that it actually has a process on the SharePoint side through Design Manager that converts what you've done in the HTML file into that .master file, and that .master file is what SharePoint uses to render the site. So once you save in that .master file and the connection is broken, then any changes you make there don't get replicated into that .master file. So don't open it. You can also make use of something in SharePoint through the Design Manager called a preview page. Preview pages allow us to customize it and see what we're doing without having to apply that custom master page to our sites. Right? So I always encourage people to go through, if you're using this, you're using Design Manager to work with your sites and to customize them, to go out and create a couple of pages in your site that actually have some content in them, not just rely on the main publishing page to look at it. Create a site and add a few web parts to it. Create a site and put text on the page and an image. And then you can customize which preview pages you're utilizing through a drop-down menu at the top in the app launcher area. And so then as I'm looking at my preview page, I can switch between the different content pages, the previews, to see what that changes are doing. So it makes it easier to kind of do that without having to apply it, or you don't really get as many surprises in the future. So how do you customize this using HTML? You actually get something that are called code snippets in the Design Manager. This is all through Design Manager to get those. So if you're working with HTML instead of the .master file, you're going to need to be in Design Manager to get to these code snippets. They're basically the way that we can take the SharePoint controls and add them into our page as HTML. That's how we can convert things through. You'll see items like top navigation, vertical, search box, all of these different controls. And you can go through, you can customize them. So if you have done it in HTML before and you have custom CSS classes, you can actually apply those here as additional CSS classes. And then it basically will come through and give you that HTML snippet, which you copy out and then paste into your HTML file. And so that's how you transition those items over from your controls as SharePoint controls, is making use of these code snippets. If you import in that master page, really important when you first open it up and edit it to look for the items that they added in. Things like the ribbon and the main content placeholder get added into your HTML file. And so you want to make sure that you don't ever delete the ones that it's added in. So if you didn't put it there and you're like, oh, what is this? Where did this come from? Don't just delete it, because it's probably something that SharePoint needs to run. And you can usually see those. They've got the kind of commented controls out around them in your HTML file when you go in there. And then if you're using, so this is actually, Dreamweaver, so you can see some of the design preview from some of the elements that are purely design and CSS, but you'll see things like the ribbon comes in as like a blue box that says the ribbon will go here. Okay, so from here, I'm gonna demo both that theme color palette tool, and I'm gonna demo some of how the code snippets work, and then we're gonna go back into presentation. So let me get there. Gotta duplicate. So this is that color palette tool. Again, like I said, you can tell that they were really invested in it. This is the icon for the color palette tool. It's a little window box, right? Really invested in it. If I need to make it smaller, it doesn't resize, just cuts off the content. Yeah. So you can do a few things here that are actually very nice. So you can expand this out and look at it. Here's all the different colors, right, that I get associated with my sites. And you'll notice a few things right away, like we have transparency now, right? We didn't have that in previous versions of SharePoint. We can actually use CSS transparency on our colors because we've moved up to CSS 3.0. Woohoo! We're so excited. But there's different ways to view this, and you get the little preview of it off to the side. This is what's called the color buckets menu, and I kind of look at it and I'm like, well, this is like themes in SharePoint 2010 where I picked accents 1 through 12 and needed to figure out what it is. So then if you go into things like UI type, I like UI groups is my favorite one, and then you can expand them out and see what they actually apply to. I will say they have not updated them since it moved from Suite Bar to App Launcher. So when you're in this section for like the top bar, it still says Suite Bar. So it's a little trickier to figure it out. But you can start to see what these are, you know, navigation, hover, and really start to customize your color palette. So it really gives us, if you're going into that composed look option for our collaboration sites, this really gives us some of that ability to really hone in on what we're trying to customize color-wise. So you can go through and create these, and then when you need to do this one, you just hit save, right? And it saves it as that .spcolor file extension right out of here. So all I do is go download this tool and start playing around with it to get to those things. You can see if I wanted to change this one, I could do it as a hexadecimal, or I can do it here. I can play around with the opacity and the lumosity and all of that right through this little tool, and it would go through and do that. So it's a really great little tool for working with the composed looks because it really does give us some of those clues as to what some of those colors are and where they apply. The other thing that you can't see on this page, but that I'll scroll over a little bit for you, if it allows me to. No? There is over here on the side that it's not allowing me to show you. There's the ability to change that order that they show up in the drop down as to what colors they are so that you can make it recognizable for you. So what I like to do is, how it works is kind of the background color and then the Suite Bar color and one other color from the list. So it kind of looks, if you're using like blues or grays or anything like that for your company colors, it sometimes can look similar to the ones in that drop down list. And so I like to do things like change mine to accent colors so that I can really identify what my color scheme is in the list. When you go to look, yes. You can't tell which one's yours apart from your colors. No. Unfortunately, no. So yeah, I was going to show you how you get there. So in here, underneath change the look, right? Because theme and composed look isn't enough. We need another clue, another change. So change the look is where we go to for that. And I may not be in the right place. I'm not. So here's my gallery here where I've uploaded that font file or that color file. If I go back in here to my site settings and I go to change the look under here. So here is my new one. The only way to see what yours is through those colors. So it does add them at the top if you just upload your file and it's named something other than S. So if you name it in the letter of the alphabet that's higher than S, you know, A through anything above S, it'll go to the top. So mine was at the top of my list. And it also shows it there. Again, you have the options Seattle and Oslo to try it out. I typically just stick with Seattle. So you can see it applies my colors through and goes through and does that. So I'm going to go back because I don't want to do that yet. So pretty easy to do, pretty easy to work with that. Oh, why did I leave there? I needed that. But to work with things like the master pages and all of that, the snippet gallery here is through my design manager. When I'm actually working with, I'll go to the design manager so you can see it. When you're in here and you're editing the master page, and you actually click on one to edit it, you get the option of it previews it, which is what it's trying to do here. So it previews it, and you'll see here's those preview pages that I was talking about where you can create new or select existing. But there's the snippet gallery off to the right. And so I would simply select that, and here I can go into the snippet gallery. So if I select things like top navigation, I can go through and start to customize it a little bit by picking some different options. I can add my own CSS. I could add appearance, background color, some of this right through the snippet library. I could give it different styling, different appearance, different behaviors all through this. Once I do that, I would update it. And once I hit that update button, it changes this code snippet here. And so you would simply come through and select it, copy it, and paste it into your HTML file. Yes? Yeah. Yeah, so that's the tricky one, is that when they built this, they weren't thinking that people would actually use managed metadata. So what I usually tell people to do is to open up the HTML from Seattle and take the top navigation from there if you're wanting to use managed metadata. This is the structured navigation. It's a tricky thing, and they haven't updated this yet, and I don't know why to include that, because more and more people are using the managed metadata navigation. But yes, you would want to go into the Seattle.master or Seattle.html and pull the snippet that's out of that for the managed metadata navigation and put that in there. But so you just copy that and paste it into your HTML file, and then obviously it's not going to render anything in any tool that you're using because it doesn't know how to translate that, so you're not going to have design view. You're just going to have code view, but you can really start to customize and really use HTML for this. You can still wrap it in regular HTML pieces. I actually wrap mine in divs with new CSS classes and things like that it will then inherit too, because a lot of the SharePoint classes are set to inherit. And so if I wrap a style around it and it's got other classes underneath it, we'll start to inherit it. So it does start to give us a little bit of that kind of way to go about it. So, okay. I'm going to show one other thing while I'm in here. I'm going to show you how to set this global theme. So again, it's in the admin portal. Of course, it's going to want me to log in. And you can get to that from here by clicking on your tenant name. You can also get to it by going to the company profile. So if I go here to my tenant name, you'll see I have my profile information, but then also that custom theming option. And so you can set the custom logo. You could set a background image for that whole bar instead of a color. You can set the accent color, the nav bar background. As you can see, the accent color is that what I like to call the waffle icon in the top left corner. So it kind of looks like a waffle. And then you can set the background color. I just have a custom logo that sits in the middle. So you can combine this with a background and then a custom logo on top of the background image to kind of go a little bit further. And then you can also customize some of the app menu icons, which is this, and that's basically changing, new things that come in are all black. We can eventually color those, I hope. So you could go through and apply that. Again, like I said, if you're using it in your sites, as I am here. So here I have a custom composed look that's been applied to this, as well as a custom master page, so it doesn't apply. I just have the green across the top here. But then if I'm in OneDrive in the same tenant, it applies. So that's some of that inconsistency. Now you can match them up a little bit because you can create alternate CSS for your sites that can go along with your composed look to customize it to look like this, but it doesn't just inherit it. You're shaking your head. That's how I feel every day when I do this, and I'm just like, oh, why? Okay. Any questions about any of this? No? So I'll tell you, this is a custom master page that's been applied to this site. It's Office 365. It looks quite different from regular. This is in publishing. I have underneath it, say my team sites and my everything like that, that's this. So it doesn't have as many colors. It's more consistent to tie into it. But this is where I'm talking about you can still customize it in Office 365. That is what this is. It's a custom master page that's been applied to the site. It is a fake fixed width site, meaning that this is just a margin that's applied to either side of that main content placeholder. So it does scale out and scale down. But it is not designed to be used with things like document libraries and lists because they don't respond. It's actually also a responsive design here. So if I came along here and made this smaller, you'd see the navigation compresses. So that's done just using CSS, right? And so, but that is tied in with my custom master page here. But you can do that, again, like I said, I encourage custom master pages in the publishing infrastructure. It works really well. I didn't go through and do alternate CSS for my composed look site, but you can to get it a little closer to make sure that these kind of all tie in together, the app launcher. You can customize a few of the things like moving a few things around using CSS to match up a little bit better to your piece. What you're missing is those abilities to add those headers, those footers, those really custom logo elements and things like that. But with a composed look, it's a little hard to see, but there is actually a background image in the background there that is kind of tying into the other. It's the logo from the other one, kind of tied in the background. So that's kind of the option that I kind of tell people that's the way to kind of go with it, is to do kind of a combination of the three. And so you kind of go around that way. Okay. I'm going to jump back in here. Why did it go back there? Okay, so how do we publish it and apply it? So we've done some of the custom everything, or we've done those composed looks. What do we do? How do we make it so that we can apply this everywhere, make it easy? Especially with Office 365, you're going to end up with multiple site collections and lots of subsites underneath it. How do I apply this? How do I make it work? I still like to do solutions. I like to package them up and apply them that way. The development, so I typically tell people create a site collection that you can use to test in your tenant and create this, that you're just testing and developing in that one. The reason I say do it in the same tenant is because you're going to have the same features that you will have in the other, so you can test it that way. It doesn't really work to have multiple tenants anymore because they could be on different servers and different data centers that are getting updates at different times. So you would want to go through and do that. You can still do this using solutions and going through and applying it. You can also do it from the publishing infrastructure, adding your custom master page, things like that. But you can customize your CSS, again, doing it with, in the custom master page, you can do it using the alternate CSS URL, or you can use a CSOM method to actually apply custom CSS to your sites. Those theme colors that we looked at in that naming system there, you can actually write some of your alternate CSS using those. So here you can see that title, which we would have seen in that list on the left in that color palette tool. We can use that to say that I want it to be the same color as site title, and you can use some of that to make your CSS smaller now, which is a great thing to do because CSS files for SharePoint can be gigantic. I think the biggest one I ever had was 120,000 lines in one CSS file to make SharePoint to look different. Now, how do we do this? How do we apply it? Solutions are still an option as much as Microsoft tries to, they tell me, no, and I say, but it works, and they're not deprecated yet. So solutions, you can write them. They are sandboxed solutions for Office 365, and yes, sandbox solutions are deprecated, but not for branding. In fact, Design Manager creates a sandbox solution if you tell it to package your designs. So until they change it to write an app, they can't tell me it's fully deprecated. So you can do that and apply them, add them to your solution gallery and activate them. It applies and it is available everywhere then for that site collection if you do it at that root site collection side. Again, write in Design Manager at the end after you've done create design package, and it actually will make a sandbox solution. The trick in that one, I'll tell you the trick is that the only way it tells you that the solution has been created and gives you the area to download it is this little line of text right here. So pay attention to what happens on your screen. It just says, it's ready, click here to download. Otherwise, you're like, why isn't it doing anything? You then would go into your solution gallery of the site and upload it and activate it. And once you do that, it's available to be applied. Now, the method that Microsoft would like us to do is to move towards adding branding via apps using the app model. I would love to tell you everything there is to know about using the app model for this, but it is very complicated, and they just released an update to it about 2 weeks ago. And so they keep changing it on us. They update it every so often. But there is a great repository through the patterns and practices on GitHub that has code samples of how to do this. And when you get your videos, you can watch the session that Vesa and Jeremy did actually right before this one in a different room that goes through and shows you what this code looks like. And if you don't want to wait for your videos, they're doing it at Ignite, and it'll be online within a week after Ignite, so just go find it there. But it's a patterns and practices GitHub repository. There's all kinds of ways to add alternate CSS, to set your composed look, and even to do other branding. They're not really giving us one for master pages because they really don't want us to do them, but you can still do it through an app. In fact, I have lots of people that are doing page layouts and master pages through it. You look at what they're doing for setting the alternate CSS, and you can kind of, if you looked at the app model at all and worked with it, you can start to figure out how to do it. So I recommend going out there. They added some new documentation 2 weeks ago to explain some of it, but there's all kinds of branding examples there. So where are we going? This is kind of the tricky part in that Microsoft is really moving away from heavy customizations as far as UX and Office 365. The reason for that is that as they have now started managing Office 365 SharePoint as a service, they've learned the pain that we have maybe been putting up with for years managing our on-premises installations. And they've realized that they need to make some changes to iterate quickly and to do that so that it's supported. And moving away from the heavy UX customizations is just kind of the direction they're going. So that's why I say custom master pages and publishing. Publishing infrastructure is pretty solid. It's not really changing a lot, whereas some of the collaboration and the additional features that are being released are using different methods. So that's kind of that. If you're looking to get into branding and Office 365 and you want to know where do I learn, what do I need to learn to do this, I always tell people to really learn CSS and JavaScript because you can make the most impact in branding for Office 365 and in SharePoint in general using those two tools. I never knew how many different ways I knew to position something using CSS until I started working with SharePoint. And I think I found 27 different ways to position an object one day because it wasn't working, and I just kept trying different methods until I think number 27 actually worked. And so it's all about kind of CSS. You can do so much with just CSS. Like I said, that custom master page that I showed you with the responsive, that's using the Bootstrap framework. So that the changes that I made in the custom master page alone was I added in a header area so that I could put some things there. And I added my CSS link and my JavaScript files for Bootstrap. And that's all I did. All the other changes were all done using CSS. All of that of making it responsive and all of that. And I believe Microsoft is actually going to release a PNP GitHub repository piece on making that CSS responsive SharePoint site coming up in the next couple of months. So keep an eye out for that. Designers are quickly becoming developers. I will say that I do not like it. I am going kicking, screaming. I always used Visual Studio for my SharePoint branding development, but now that they're making me learn the app model and write real code, I'm not real super happy about it. But we are becoming more of that, so please, if you're looking to do this, you do have to have a basic understanding of the app model or have a good team of developers that do understand it so you can hand your assets over to them and have them package it into an app. That is going to be the way coming soon that you will only be able to apply branding through the app model to Office 365. I don't know when, I can't tell you a timeline. That is just the intimation that I have been given is that you will go to the app model, you will use it, and you will like it. And so I imagine that at some point, Sandbox will go away. I imagine that maybe at some point, Design Manager will change the way it looks because they're discouraging custom master pages to a certain extent, things like that. So app model, understand it. Then, sadly, the last piece of it is that you have to plan for constant changes when you're working with Office 365 and trying to customize the user experience. Things that, you're not going to get alerted and notified that they're coming before they come out. You're going to come into work one day and you're going to log in and the app launcher is going to be blue. It's just going to happen. Microsoft did this with the Sweet Bar from many, many months ago now. We all had customized it and everything, and they released an update, and one day everybody came to work and it was blue. And I love to tell that was not a really popular change. Many years ago, and this has been probably 8 years ago now, I worked with a small company called Coca-Cola. And I don't know how many of you know things about Coca-Cola, but they have a real affinity for the color red. And in fact, they have a really strong dislike for the color blue. There's this other company called Pepsi-Cola that's blue. They don't like blue at Coca-Cola. So Coca-Cola was using Office 365. And one morning, they logged into their Office 365 sites, and guess what was there? A big blue bar across the top of every site. And guess what their corporate branding schema says? It's a 72-page document that says no blue ever, no color, no variation, no blue, no blue, no blue. In fact, Sprite, I don't know if you know Sprite, it's like lemonade for us. It's green with blue and yellow. They're only allowed to use the blue and yellow, or the green and yellow. They can't use blue for anything in their Sprite implementations. So they called me up. It was like 7 o'clock in the morning. I haven't worked for them 8 years, remember? And my cell phone number, luckily for them, hasn't changed. And they call me up and they say, help us, help us, help us. We don't know what happened. We're already yelling. We've gone through everyone else who's ever helped us, and they can't figure it out. I'm like, well, I'm still asleep because it's 6 a.m. for me. I'm in a different time zone. What's going on? And so they explained it to me. Microsoft is pushing out some of these constant changes through things like JavaScript injection, right? And so on that particular day, they had published out a JavaScript injection file the night before that added prefixes to all of the items in the Sweet Bar, which invalidated any custom CSS you had written for it because now the CSS class names are different. And so that's how we had to go in and write a JavaScript injection file that overwrote there to give our own CSS classes to keep it from going back to blue. And so needless to say, some people at Microsoft got some very not happy phone calls that day when they made everything blue for Pepsi-Cola. But you can't really plan for that. They're just going to kind of do it. You're going to get those notifications the same time your users do. Yes? No. The only way to do that is to use on-premises. Unfortunately, you can try to mitigate that by doing things like not having first release turned on in your tenant and things like that, but some things fast-track past that. Delve was one of those. It got pushed out regardless whether or not you had first release turned on. So you can try to mitigate it. I will say that I do know, I have no idea when it's coming. They can't give us a time frame. They're trying to work on a roadmap where you'll see what they're working on as far as Office 365 and do some things like escalating, like we're pushing out a new version of the master page and some of those kinds of things. But they've been telling me that they're doing a roadmap for the last year and a half, and I haven't seen one yet. So right now, I find out new things happen when my users log in the next day and call me and say, this is here, what is this, or I can't find this, or this is blue and everything else is green, and then that's kind of when you find out. So it's one of those things of making sure, especially if you're doing this and you work for, make sure the executives are aware that that is what's going to happen. There's no foolproof way of stopping it. In the publishing side, like I said, if you're using publishing and you've customized your master page, sometimes that will prevent you from getting new features. But if you're using full Office 365 and they hit like that sites button, to get that list, they may have something there which you've prevented from showing up in your site because you're using a custom master page. It's not going to prevent them from being able to get to it from any of those places that are not using your custom master page. Things like Delve and those sites pages and OneDrive and all of those that we don't control, they would still be able to click it from there, and you can't hide it from there very easily. So they're still going to get to it. So it's one of those kind of trade-off things. So yes, you can to a certain extent do it, but not really because they're still going to get it in other places. Sadly, it's the way that they're going with it, but I wish it was different. I wish I'm like you. I'm like, I want to tell my users about it and educate them before they get these new features, and we just can't control that pace. So, well, that brings us to the end. Does anybody else have any questions? If you actually want to see things about customizing master pages and so forth like that, I have sessions out on my blog site. I have cards that you could grab for that actually show code or have some samples and things like that, as well as when you get the DVDs. The session yesterday about on-prem, I actually did more code look at master pages and CSS and go through some of that. All of that would apply if you're creating a custom master page here. It's just more limited in how you're going to apply it. Okay? Thank you so much for coming. I hope you attend the attendee party tonight. It's always a great, good time. And I have cards, and I'll be around all day tomorrow. If you have questions, you can shoot me an email or hit me up on Twitter, and I'll come find you, and we can have a conversation. But thank you so much for coming. I appreciate it.